The slap arrived before the shame, a hot white flash across my cheek that sent my glasses skittering over polished marble while 130 mouths forgot how to breathe. The ballroom at the Halcyon Hotel swallowed the music mid-note. A violinist froze with his bow mid-air as if my face had interrupted the score. I heard a single bead from the chandelier loosen and ping against the floor near my heel. Clara Dawson, my brand-new daughter-in-law in silk and rhinestones, drew her hand back with the triumphant calm of someone who believed the world would applaud. "That's what you get for being selfish, Isabella," she said, loud enough for the videographer to catch every syllable. "A woman your age doesn't need a 3-bedroom apartment in the city. Give us the keys and stop clinging to things you can't manage." My chest hurt more than my cheek. I bent, palms trembling, to collect the twisted arm of my frames while shoes pivoted away from me. Bronze stilettos, patent Oxfords, polished wingtips, all of them discovering the sudden necessity of staring at centerpieces. No one moved to help. Some guests lowered their eyes. Others leaned together in the soft, conspiratorial posture of people who will tell this story later over dessert. My son, Daniel, did not look at me at all. He studied the floor as if an answer might be engraved there, the corners of his mouth pulled taut with the effort of pretending to be absent. "You're not welcome here anymore," Clara continued, smoothing an invisible crease from her gown, the way you wipe chalk from a slate after a solved problem. "Daniel and I need our privacy to start our life. Your place is perfect for us while we look for somewhere better." Her voice was clean glass. She had practiced this. I straightened slowly, seeing my blurred reflection in a wall of beveled mirrors. A thin woman in a thrift store dress holding broken spectacles like a prop from a bad joke. For 2 years I had absorbed her small humiliations. "Isabella, that coat is vintage, by which I mean dead. Isabella, it's unsafe to drive something that old. Isabella, at the flower shop, shouldn't you be resting?" When a young woman tells you to rest, she means be silent. When your son says nothing, he means agree. I lifted my chin and found Daniel's face. He had my husband's eyes, except tonight they were empty picture frames, waiting for someone else's photograph. "Give me the keys," Clara said softly now, the dangerous tone that draws blood without raising a voice. "Don't make me ask again." The band leader coughed. A bridesmaid shifted a bouquet from one hand to the other. The hotel's ice sculpture, a swan, glittered through my ruined vision with comic serenity. I felt something inside me, not breaking but unclasping. It sounded like the click of a jewelry box you'd forgotten contained a weapon. I slid my hand into the old black purse I'd carried for years, the one Clara liked to call heritage. I touched the phone, the curve of its case like a cool riverstone, and understood that I had run out of time to be careful. I had tried to be a mother and a shield and a ghost. It was time to be something else. I turned without a word. The doors breathed cold air as I pushed through, and the ballroom's perfume, peonies, champagne, anxiety, fell off my shoulders like a shawl. Outside, the hotel's garden was lit with string bulbs and the low gold of the city. I could still hear laughter behind glass, the party's heartbeat trying to restart. My cheek throbbed in time with it. On the curb, a valet jogged past with someone's joy humming in his pocket. I sat in my old sedan, the seat familiar as prayer, and pressed the single number I had never deleted. "Victor Ramirez," answered the man who had handled my family's money in silent corridors and knew how to keep a secret until it was useful. "It's Isabella," I said. My voice steadied on his name. "I need you at the Halcyon, now. Bring the portfolio, the blue one, and the letters we discussed last spring, and Victor, the addendum." He was quiet for a measured beat, long enough to read everything I wasn't saying. "Isabella," he replied, voice low and precise. "Once we open that folder in public, it cannot be closed." I stared through the windshield at the ballroom's windows, at the silhouette of my son beside a woman who had mistaken cruelty for strategy. "Then don't bring a folder," I said. "Bring a mirror." I ended the call and watched my hands in the dashboard lights. They were steady. In the passenger seat, a grocery tote held a brown envelope Henry Cole, my neighbor, my witness, had advised me to copy months ago. Titles, statements, a picture of my husband on our last good day, his fingers inked from signing papers that would one day save me from my own child. A gust rattled the plane trees and sent a confetti of leaves across the hotel's steps. I touched the welt blooming on my cheek and let the pain finish writing a sentence I should have written sooner. Tonight they would learn that the woman in the flower shop apron was never theirs to move like furniture. Tonight, the performance ended. The garden lights blurred without my glasses, soft halos instead of sharp bulbs, and it struck me that this was how Clara preferred the world, vague, malleable, beautiful from a distance. But memory has its own lenses, clearer than glass, and they snapped into focus the moment I closed my eyes in the car. The first time Daniel had introduced Clara to me, 2 years earlier, he'd worn the smile he used as a boy when he'd broken something in the kitchen and wanted me to believe it was an accident. "Mom, this is Clara Dawson," he'd said, voice pitched high with anticipation. Clara had extended a manicured hand, her nails pale pink and polished like porcelain teacups. She glanced around my apartment the way an appraiser studies water damage. "How quaint," she murmured, and I knew then she was not admiring. She sat stiffly on my old floral couch, barely touching the armrest, as though upholstery could transmit poverty. When I served lasagna, the recipe Daniel had begged for every birthday as a boy, she pressed her lips into a smile and said she was keeping her figure. I noticed how her eyes roamed, not to the bookshelf or photographs, but to the balcony view, the size of the rooms, the sturdiness of the oak floors. At the time, I told myself I was being uncharitable. Love makes us forgive what respect should not. But Clara was not careless. She was meticulous. A month later, during Sunday dinner, she said in front of Daniel, "Isabella, don't you think you'd be more comfortable in a smaller place? At your age, maintenance must be a challenge." Daniel nodded as if hypnotized, and I understood. She had found the string to pull, and my son had tied himself to it. The insults began like drops of water seeping into stone. "Isabella, that coat looks like something from a thrift bin. Isabella, you shouldn't be working at a flower shop. It's unbecoming. Isabella, that car is dangerous, really." Each phrase was not a dagger, but a needle, sewing a costume around me, the helpless widow. I played the role because sometimes survival requires theater, but inside I was recording every line, every glance. 3 months before the wedding, Clara orchestrated her masterpiece. She arrived at my apartment not only with Daniel, but with her parents, Martin and Eleanor Dawson, people who smelled of polished wood and disdain. Martin walked my hallway like a surveyor. Eleanor perched in a chair, her legs crossed at an angle of judgment, and said, "We believe it's time you made responsible decisions about your future." Future, she meant, was my apartment key in Clara's clutch. "At your age, living alone is unsafe," Martin added, his baritone deliberate. "A medical emergency could go unnoticed for days. We've researched residences with excellent facilities." He slid a glossy brochure across my coffee table. In the corner, Daniel sat silent, nodding like a marionette. "Appropriate for your age," he finally muttered, eyes avoiding mine. I remember how my throat burned then, not with tears but with a fury I had not tasted in decades. "And who decides what's appropriate for me?" I asked. The silence that followed was answer enough. They had rehearsed every line, like actors in a cruel play. Clara leaned forward, her voice syrupy. "It isn't just about the apartment, Isabella. It's about your well-being. We want to make sure you're not lonely, not financially unstable. You deserve friends your age." Her smile was as sharp as glass, but I caught the flicker in her eyes when she mentioned finances. She thought she was playing chess. She never suspected I was counting the pieces, too. That night, after they left with their unspoken threat, hinting that if I didn't comply, Daniel might be forced to take legal action regarding my competence, I sat in the dark of my living room until the city lights turned silver. I knew then that I had lost my son to something worse than death, ambition without honor. But I also knew they had underestimated me. The next morning, I called Amelia Torres, an old friend who had built her reputation in real estate. "Amelia," I said, "I need you to check on a young couple's financial history. Their names are Daniel Warren and Clara Dawson. Discretion is everything." Her report chilled me. Credit card debts piled to the ceiling, eviction notices hovering over their rental, cars financed far beyond their salaries, a wedding spread across borrowed money like icing over a hollow cake. Clara worked part-time as an image consultant, making barely enough to cover her makeup. Daniel, my son, was drowning in $80,000 of personal loans. And then the detail that hardened my resolve. Amelia had overheard through a colleague that Clara had been asking lawyers about how to gain control of an elder relative's property through guardianship petitions. My name had not been spoken, but it didn't need to be. I understood then that every comment, every insult, every concern was not clumsy cruelty. It was strategy. That night I called Victor. "Prepare the papers," I told him. "All of them, including the will." "Are you sure, Isabella?" he asked, his voice the measured calm of a man who knew he was being asked to load a weapon. "Yes," I whispered into the phone, staring at the shadow of my husband's photograph. "I have protected them long enough. It's time to protect myself." The Halcyon's parking lot smelled faintly of gasoline and magnolias, a clash of the raw and the refined, and it reminded me of the double life I had been living for nearly 2 decades. To Clara and Daniel, I was a woman bound by thrift, 10-year-old sedan, supermarket dresses, a part-time flower shop clerk who lived frugally in an apartment she couldn't possibly maintain alone. But that was the image my husband, Robert, and I had cultivated deliberately, as carefully as some people prune roses. Robert had been many things: clever, stubborn, secretive, but above all he was strategic. "Visible wealth attracts vultures," he used to say, his fingers ink-stained from balancing ledgers late into the night. "Invisible wealth gives you power." He died 8 years ago, leaving me with the fortress he had built: portfolios, trusts, properties hidden behind shell companies, even an office building that still produces rent checks larger than Clara's wildest shopping fantasies. Yet to the outside world, including my own son, I was the poor widow clipping coupons. The irony was bitter. The very woman Clara had mocked for her outdated coats was the reason her fiancé still drove a car that wasn't repossessed. For 3 years I had been paying Daniel's debts in secret. Anonymous transfers, negotiated rent reductions covered quietly by me, even a portion of the wedding deposit guaranteed through my private account. He believed in bonuses and discounts. In truth, it was his mother patching leaks in a sinking ship. I remember the night I finally admitted this to myself, sitting at the kitchen table with Victor's spreadsheets spread before me. "You've been subsidizing them by nearly $4,500 a month," he had said, pointing to neat columns of transfers. "Without you, Daniel would have defaulted on everything long ago." "And he never asked how the miracle happened?" I replied, though I already knew the answer. "When you are drowning, you do not question the rope someone throws. You just climb it, no matter who holds the other end." But Clara had smelled the truth. That was her genius. She knew I wasn't as fragile as I pretended. She knew the apartment in the city was more than shelter. It was a vault. So she sharpened her strategy. Henry Cole, my neighbor, had been the one to spot it. "Isabella," he told me one evening while we drank tea on the balcony, "that girl brought an appraiser to your building last week. Clipboard, measuring tape, the works. When I asked who he was, they vanished faster than smoke." His eyes, sharp despite his 70 years, left no doubt. That was the moment I realized the game was not hypothetical anymore. Clara wasn't just maneuvering for influence. She was preparing for a takeover. So I opened the brown folder I had not touched in years. Inside were the deeds, a downtown office block, a beachfront house in Florida, and 3 rental properties in suburban neighborhoods where tenants had never once missed a payment. There were also certificates showing an investment account worth more than $5 million, grown quietly through Robert's careful trades. And tucked in the back, the amended will that I had signed just a month earlier. I had already begun to redirect my estate away from Daniel. It was painful, like cutting a vein, but necessary. Instead of him, the beneficiaries would be organizations for elder protection, literacy programs, and, most poignantly, the foundation Robert and I had once dreamed of creating. As I sorted through the papers, my hand brushed against a photograph. Robert and I on the balcony of this very apartment, glasses raised, the city glowing behind us, his handwriting on the back: "Live simply, love fiercely, protect wisely." I had tried, but protecting Daniel had turned him into a stranger. When the ballroom slap came that night, it wasn't just humiliation, it was confirmation. My son was gone, replaced by a man who would stand silent while his bride carved up his mother in front of an audience. The only thing left was the mask I had worn for too long, and masks, once torn, cannot be reapplied. Victor's headlights swung into the parking lot then, a white arc cutting across the asphalt. He stepped out, tall, his briefcase tucked under one arm, his tie loose but his eyes alert. "Isabella," he said, walking quickly, "I brought everything. But I'll ask one last time. Are you ready? Because once this begins, you will not get your son back." I rose from the car, folder in my hands, cheek still burning where Clara's palm had marked me. "Victor," I replied, steady now, "my son is already gone. Tonight, I reclaim myself." We walked toward the glowing ballroom doors together, where laughter still spilled like champagne, unaware that in minutes the celebration would curdle into silence. The ballroom doors yielded under my hand like the entrance to a theater, and for a moment I stood in the archway with Victor at my side, hearing the music stumble to a stop as though the orchestra itself sensed an intruder. Conversations froze mid-laughter. The scent of sugared roses and champagne hit me, thick and artificial. But underneath it, I smelled tension, the kind of ozone crackle before a storm breaks. Clara's eyes locked on me first. She was standing center floor, veil pinned back, champagne flute in hand, her lips curled in that porcelain smile that had just hours earlier disguised a venomous slap. "Isabella," she said, voice slicing the quiet, "you already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for tonight?" A ripple of whispers ran through the guests. Some clutched their phones tighter, instinctively preparing to record. Others shifted in their seats like restless jurors. "Ladies and gentlemen," Victor announced, his tone carrying the gravity of a courtroom, "I apologize for the interruption, but I have urgent matters to address with Mr. Daniel Warren and Mrs. Clara Dawson." Daniel stumbled forward, face pale, tie askew, the groom transformed into a frightened boy. "Mom," he whispered hoarsely, "what is this? Who is this man?" "This," I said clearly, so the chandelier trembled with my words, "is Victor Ramirez, my financial and legal advisor, and he is here tonight because you left me no other choice." Victor set his briefcase on the nearest table and snapped it open with the precision of a guillotine. "Mr. Warren," he began, extracting the first document, "effective immediately, the lease guarantee your mother has provided for your current residence has been canceled. You have 30 days to secure another guarantor or vacate." Gasps swelled from the crowd. Daniel blinked as if someone had poured ice water down his spine. "Lease guarantee?" he croaked. "What are you talking about?" Victor didn't pause. "Additionally, all monthly transfers totaling $4,500 that your mother has been making to cover your debts, credit cards, and vehicle expenses are terminated as of tonight." The bride's champagne glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. Clara lunged forward, hysteria rising in her throat. "That's impossible. She works at a flower shop. Look at her. She's a penniless old woman. You expect us to believe?" "Appearances are deceptive," I cut in, my voice iron. "That is a lesson you were meant to learn before tonight." The ballroom erupted with murmurs, phones now lifted openly, red recording dots winking like judgmental eyes. Victor pulled the final paper, his voice resonant. "Lastly, the guaranteed payment for this celebration, ballroom, catering, music, and photography, has been revoked. Unless alternative payment is arranged, management has the right to suspend services immediately." The silence after his words was broken only by the sound of cutlery clinking as someone dropped a fork in disbelief. Clara spun, panic-stricken, her face draining color under the weight of 200 eyes. "You can't do this!" she shrieked, dragging Daniel by the sleeve. "Tell her, Daniel! Stop her!" But Daniel's lips moved soundlessly. He looked at me with a dawning comprehension that was not gratitude, but horror. "You've been paying for everything?" he whispered, the boy in him surfacing for a fractured second. "For 3 years," I said evenly. "And for 3 years I told myself it was temporary, that my son would remember the values I raised him with. But tonight, when you watched your wife strike me and did nothing, I realized I wasn't helping you. I was destroying you." The crowd held its breath. The air tasted metallic, like the edge of lightning. Victor wasn't finished. He placed one more envelope on the table and slid it toward me. "And here is the amendment to your will, Isabella, signed and notarized. Shall I read it aloud?" "Yes," I said, my gaze fixed on Daniel and Clara. "Let them hear." Victor unfolded the paper with care. "All assets previously designated for Mr. Daniel Warren are hereby reassigned to charitable foundations specializing in elder protection, housing assistance, and educational scholarships, effective immediately." A collective gasp rolled through the ballroom like a wave hitting shore. Clara staggered back, clutching at her gown as if fabric could anchor her collapsing world. Daniel swayed, his hands trembling, his lips forming a single word: "No." "You planned to strip me of my home," I told them, my voice steady though my heart pounded. "You conspired to declare me unfit. You thought I was fragile. But what you failed to understand is that fragility can be a disguise. And tonight, that disguise ends." Cameras flashed. Guests whispered frantically, some already uploading clips that would outlive the bouquet toss. The stage Clara had chosen for my humiliation had become the courtroom of her undoing. Behind me, Victor closed his briefcase with a sharp click. "That concludes the legal matters," he said. "The consequences, however, are just beginning." And in the silence that followed, I saw Clara's composure shatter at last, her perfect posture collapsing into a scream that was half denial, half fear, and wholly deserved. 3 days after the wedding debacle, the phone on my kitchen wall had become a weapon of noise. It rang with Daniel's voice first, 40 calls in one day, cycling through outrage, disbelief, then the brittle whine of a man begging for a life preserver. "Mom, you've lost your mind," he hissed in one message. "Do you realize what you've done?" The next voicemail trembled. "Please, you don't understand. Clara's sick with stress. Just give us a little help until we figure things out." By the 10th, he was sobbing. "We can't pay the hotel bill, Mom. They're threatening to sue us." Clara, on the other hand, turned her poison outward. Her texts arrived like clockwork, each more theatrical than the last. "You'll regret this when you're in a nursing home," one read. "You think you're smart, but everyone saw your breakdown. The court will too." Another was more chilling. "Enjoy your little victory. We still have Plan B." Plan B. The words pulsed in my mind like a bruise. By the end of that week, I understood what she meant. Victor arrived one morning, his face graver than usual, carrying a folder he had clearly hoped never to open. "Isabella," he said, laying papers on the table, "Daniel has filed a preliminary petition with the court. He's asking for an evaluation of your mental competency." The words chilled me. I scanned the pages. Affidavits from wedding guests, sworn statements claiming I had acted irrationally, humiliated the couple without reason, even jeopardized the celebration. Unjustified emotional outburst, one read. Erratic financial behavior, claimed another. Clara's fingerprints were all over them. Henry Cole knocked on my door that afternoon, carrying his phone. "Look," he said, eyes alight with the triumph of a man who smelled justice. On the screen was a video already spreading across social media. Clara's hand swinging across my cheek in slow motion, the sound of the slap echoing in the ballroom, the crowd gasping. Captions bloomed beneath. Bride assaults mother-in-law for refusing to give up apartment. Comments scrolled by the thousands, most of them on my side. "She underestimated the internet," Henry chuckled. "These people aren't calling you senile. They're calling you a hero." I wanted to believe him, but Clara's campaign was insidious. Amelia, my friend in real estate, reported that Clara had been visiting neighbors, whispering that I had been wandering the hallways at night, forgetting my keys, confusing names. A few gullible souls began repeating the rumors. "Poor Isabella," one said at the market. "She's not well, you know. Shame her son has to handle her affairs." I clenched the handle of my shopping basket until my knuckles ached. That evening, Sophie, my niece, Daniel's cousin, arrived at my apartment with tear-stained cheeks. "Aunt Isabella," she said, "they're telling people you're losing your mind. But I know the truth, and so do most of us who grew up watching you. I'm going to help." She pulled from her bag another folder, thinner than Victor's, but no less important. A printed collection of the viral videos, news articles beginning to sprout, and comments from strangers defending me. "You're not alone anymore," Sophie whispered, gripping my hand. Still, Clara was relentless. 2 days later, Victor returned, this time with heavier news. "She's hired a legal team specializing in guardianship cases," he said. "They'll argue that your financial decisions, terminating support, canceling the wedding payment, were reckless acts proving incompetence. If a judge agrees, they could strip you of control over your estate." I laughed bitterly. "So the act of protecting myself becomes evidence I cannot protect myself." Victor's jaw tightened. "Yes, it's a dangerous inversion. But we have one advantage, the truth, and the truth is on video." The battle lines had been drawn. On one side, Clara with her fabricated witnesses, her whispers, her hunger for control. On the other, me, with my folder of documents, the viral footage, and the quiet but growing army of people who refused to believe I was losing my mind. That night, I sat on the balcony with Henry, watching the city flicker. "They won't stop until they have everything," he said. "Then," I replied, my voice steady though my chest tightened, "we'll show them what happens when everything fights back." The courthouse smelled of old paper and disinfectant, a place where lives were filed away like tax returns. I sat at the polished oak table beside Victor, my papers stacked like ammunition, while Daniel and Clara paraded in with a legal team too polished for their means. Clara's dress was cream silk, as if she mistook the hearing for another wedding. Daniel looked hollow, his tie strangling more than framing. The judge, a woman with hair pulled as tight as her schedule, raised her brows at the opening petition. "Mr. Warren," she said, scanning the lines, "you allege your mother is mentally incompetent," citing erratic financial behavior. Daniel cleared his throat, eyes darting to Clara. "Yes, Your Honor. She disrupted my wedding with outrageous claims. She canceled payments without reason. She humiliated us in front of hundreds." Clara leaned forward theatrically. "We're only trying to protect her, Judge. She's been confused for months, making rash decisions. We're worried she can't manage her affairs anymore." It would have been convincing if not for the screens. Victor had arranged them. 2 large monitors rolled into the courtroom, a technician waiting with a remote. "With the court's permission," Victor said, voice steady as stone, "I'd like to submit visual evidence contradicting these claims." The judge nodded, skeptical. The first video played. Gasps rippled across the room. On screen, Clara raised her hand in slow motion, striking me across the cheek. crystal chandeliers blazing above the stunned crowd. Then my son, motionless, head bowed. Then Clara's words, clear as glass. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space. Give us the keys." The judge's pen froze mid-note. Victor pressed on. "Your Honor, this so-called irrational outburst was nothing more than a woman defending herself after repeated humiliation. Furthermore," he slid a packet across the table, "here are bank records showing consistent transfers from my client's account to her son's. Rent payments, credit cards, vehicle expenses. Over $160,000 in 3 years. Evidence that she was supporting them, not the other way around." Clara shot to her feet. "Lies! She's fabricating—" "Sit down, Mrs. Dawson," the judge cut in, her voice like steel. More documents followed. A private investigator's report detailing Daniel's inquiries into loans against my apartment. Testimonies from neighbors, including Henry, describing Clara bringing an appraiser to my building without my knowledge. And then Sophie's contribution. A binder of social media posts, news articles, and public comments lauding me as a symbol of dignity against exploitation. The judge leafed through the stack, her expression darkening. "Mr. Warren," she said at last, "this petition was filed in bad faith. The evidence not only fails to prove your mother's incompetence, it strongly suggests a pattern of manipulation and financial abuse on your part. Therefore, I dismiss the petition with prejudice." Daniel paled. Clara gasped like a fish pulled from water. But the judge wasn't finished. "Furthermore, I am ordering sanctions for frivolous litigation. You will pay Mrs. Warren's legal fees in full. I estimate them at $45,000, collectively." The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder through the chamber. Outside, reporters swarmed. Microphones pressed forward, flashes sparked. Clara shoved past them, mascara streaking, muttering about conspiracies. Daniel followed, his shoulders bent inward, as though trying to fold himself into nothing. Victor placed a hand on my arm. "You've won," he said softly. I shook my head. "No, Victor, I've survived. That's different." The fallout was swift and merciless. Daniel lost his job within a week, his employer unwilling to weather the scandal. Clara attempted to launch an image consultancy, but her face had already been immortalized online in freeze frames of rage and hysteria. Their debts multiplied until the Dawsons' grand home became a cage with too many mouths and too little space. One evening, Henry knocked on my door with the day's newspaper folded neatly. The headline read, "Bride and groom branded greedy after court loss." He chuckled, though his eyes held sadness. "Justice has teeth, Isabella, but sometimes it bites more than we expect." I stared at Daniel's photograph beneath the headline. His eyes were mine, but clouded, unrecognizable. "I didn't want to destroy him," I whispered. "I just wanted him to remember who he was." Henry set the paper aside. "Sometimes," he said, "the boy you raised is already gone. The man left behind is a stranger." 6 months later, my apartment had transformed from a place of shadows into a command center of purpose. The coffee table that once held Clara's glossy brochures for retirement homes now overflowed with files marked casework. The phone that used to ring with Daniel's demands now connected me to lawyers, social workers, and women I had never met who whispered their own stories of sons who stole pensions, daughters who seized bank cards, grandchildren who dangled affection like blackmail. It began with a trickle. Letters slid under my door, emails through Sophie, neighbors knocking shyly to say, "I saw your interview, Mrs. Warren. Do you think you could advise my cousin?" The trickle became a current. By autumn, Victor had drawn up the legal framework for what we named the Warren Foundation for the Protection of Seniors. We worked from my living room at first. Sophie took charge of education, designing pamphlets in bright colors that said things Clara would never have allowed on glossy paper. Kindness is not weakness. Your home is not theirs to claim. Henry, with his booming laugh and sharp wit, volunteered to give workshops on recognizing manipulation tactics. "They don't expect old men to know their tricks," he told me once, tapping his temple. "That's our advantage." The foundation grew faster than any of us anticipated. A local newspaper ran a feature about the grandmother who fought back. Then a television station called. Soon my face, once invisible behind discount spectacles, was on morning programs where anchors asked in solemn tones, "Mrs. Warren, what advice do you have for families watching at home?" I told them the truth, that abuse rarely begins with fists, it begins with whispers, that love becomes dangerous when it is leveraged as debt, that dignity once surrendered is nearly impossible to recover. But with every new case we accepted, every letter thanking me, a hollow space inside remained untouched. Daniel had vanished into silence. Not a phone call, not a note, not even an insult since the court's verdict. I told myself it was better this way, cleaner, safer. And yet, at night, I caught myself listening for the buzz of the phone, hoping for a voice that would never come. Clara, however, had not disappeared. She tried again, of course. Her emails arrived under subject lines dripping with desperation. "Please reconsider. Daniel is unwell." Then, one day, the words that stopped my breath. "I'm pregnant. He will be your grandson. Can you really turn away from your own blood?" I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Robert's photograph watched me from the shelf. What would he have done? Opened the door again, or locked it tighter? When I showed Victor the message, his eyes darkened. "She'll use the child as leverage," he said flatly. "It's the oldest trick in the book." I closed the laptop with a snap. "Then she's forgotten something. Tricks only work on those who still believe the magician." But even as I spoke, a tremor of grief threaded through me. A grandson, my blood, and yet destined to grow up hearing my name twisted as warning. On the night we officially registered the foundation, Sophie raised a toast with cheap sparkling cider. "To Aunt Isabella," she said, voice thick with pride. "To the woman who taught us that family isn't defined by blood, but by respect." Everyone clinked their glasses. Henry winked at me. Victor nodded solemnly. I smiled, but it was a smile that knew victories carry scars. Because while I had won battles against Clara and Daniel, the war had taken something irretrievable. The boy who used to run into my arms after scraping his knees. The son who once whispered, "Don't worry, Mom, I'll always take care of you." That promise had died, and no foundation, no headline, no victory could resurrect it. 2 years after the night of the slap, I sat on my balcony with a cup of chamomile, watching the city bleed into dusk. The skyline glittered like a crown I no longer envied, only observed. On the table beside me lay the morning's newspaper. Warren Foundation opens 3rd Regional Office. Beneath the headline was my photograph, hair silver, face lined, but eyes alive in a way they hadn't been when Clara first crossed my threshold. The foundation had grown into something Robert would have marveled at. We had handled more than 400 cases, seniors coerced into selling homes, widowers tricked into co-signing loans, grandparents threatened with isolation from their own grandchildren unless they surrendered savings. Each victory stitched another seam in the torn fabric of my dignity. Henry, now the foundation's vice president, had turned public speaker. "Elders aren't relics," he boomed at community centers. "We're archives, and archives are worth protecting." Sophie lived next door, filling my apartment with laughter and late-night strategy sessions. She liked to remind me, "Aunt Isabella, you didn't just survive. You built a weapon from survival." And yet, one truth remained sharp. My son had not spoken to me in 2 years. The only contact came in 3 bursts. The first, 6 months after the trial, when his voice broke through the phone line dripping bitterness. "Mom, everyone thinks I'm a leech because of you. You've ruined me." I had hung up gently, not in anger, but in recognition that sometimes silence is the only shield. The second call came when Clara gave birth. "His name is Oliver," Daniel said, voice flat. "Don't you want to meet your grandson?" I closed my eyes, imagining the child's tiny fingers curling around a hand already trained to grasp. "Not while you see me as a bank account instead of a mother," I answered. He hung up without goodbye. The third came 3 months ago, after Clara left him, taking Oliver and half their few possessions. Daniel's tone was desperate, ragged. "Please, Mom, I need money, just a loan, for Oliver's sake." For a moment, my chest cracked open. The word grandson pulled harder than any chain. But then I remembered Clara's slap, Daniel's silence, the courtroom where he had tried to erase me. I said quietly, "Ethan, my dignity is exactly as important as your son. And if I give it up, what lesson will he learn?" It was the first time I had ever hung up on him. Still, Oliver haunted me. I had never held him, never kissed his forehead, yet I had already opened a trust fund for his education, to be released when he turns 18. Whether or not he knows me by then, he will know this. Someone believed his future mattered more than her pride. My health, paradoxically, had bloomed. The insomnia that plagued me during Clara's reign was gone. My doctor smiled at my last appointment. "You're living like a woman 10 years younger, Isabella. Freedom suits you." He was right. My steps felt lighter, my voice firmer, my hands steadier when I signed contracts that protected strangers who once mirrored my silence. The flower shop where I had once hidden my days had closed, but I had found new soil. The community garden I helped build on our block. I taught elders to grow herbs for sleep, flowers for joy, vegetables for stubborn health. My balcony now smelled of basil and lavender instead of regret. Yet the price of survival was etched in me. When I opened the box of family photographs, I saw Daniel's childhood smile and had to close it quickly, the ache too sharp. I no longer cried for the son I lost. I cried for the mother I had once been, the one who believed love alone could shield a child from greed. On the eve of my 70th birthday, the foundation invited me to address the Senate on elder protection laws. Reporters asked, "Do you regret what happened at that wedding?" I answered the only way truth allowed. No, because regret belongs to those who struck, not those who stood. That night, as I prepared for bed, I wrote the closing lines of my second book, Sexes 0.05, a manual for seniors facing financial abuse. I paused, pen hovering, and thought of Oliver, somewhere out there with his mother's name but my blood. They tried to erase me, but in the attempt, they erased themselves. I endured because I chose dignity over fear. And that is the true inheritance I leave. Not money, not property, but the proof that no age is too late to reclaim yourself. I put the pen down, blew out the lamp, and let the city hum lull me into sleep, certain of one thing. Survival is not the happy ending people imagine. It is sharper, lonelier, but infinitely more honest.